What if a warship could tell a story? Its tale would span two nations, a brutal war, and hold a world record. This is the story of that ship. She was a vessel born in the shadow of one global conflict and destined to become a legend in another. She served two of the world's great navies under two different names, flying two different flags, half a world apart. For nearly 6 decades, she was a floating city, a sovereign piece of territory on the high seas, and a symbol of naval power. To the British, she was HMS Hermes, the avenging flagship of the Falklands War. To the Indians, she was INS Viraat, the giant who ruled the Indian Ocean. To the world, she holds the Guinness World Record as the longest-serving warship of the modern age. This is the epic saga of the carrier that simply refused to die, a warrior known affectionately as the Grand Old Lady of the Sea. Her story begins in the smoldering embers of the greatest conflict in human history. As World War II raged, the British Admiralty, looking to the future of naval aviation, conceived of a new class of light fleet carriers. They were to be the Centaur class, ships designed to project power across Britain's vast global interests. The fourth ship of this class was laid down on June 21, 1944, at the Camel Laird shipyard in Birkenhead. Her name was to be HMS Elephant. It was a name that suggested strength and endurance, but nobody could have possibly imagined just how much endurance this ship would one day display. The end of the war in 1945 brought with it a dramatic shift in priorities. The once urgent need for new warships evaporated, replaced by the crushing reality of a bankrupt nation needing to rebuild. Construction on HMS Elephant was halted, and for years, her giant, silent hull sat waiting on the slipway, a monument to a war that was over and a future that was uncertain. Work eventually resumed, but at a glacial pace. The world was changing, and naval technology was changing with it. The dawn of the jet age meant that aircraft carriers needed to be fundamentally different. They needed stronger flight decks to handle heavier, faster aircraft and new innovations to operate them safely. Over the years, the unfinished carrier was redesigned multiple times. An angled flight deck was added, a radical new concept that allowed for simultaneous launch and recovery of aircraft. A massive steam catapult was installed, along with a state-of-the-art mirror landing aid system. Her internal electronics and radar suites were upgraded before they were even fully fitted. Finally, on February 16, 1953, 9 long years after her keel was laid, the massive hull slid into the waters of the River Mersey. But even then, she wasn't finished. She was towed to the Vickers Armstrong shipyard for fitting out, another long process that would take 6 more years. During this time, the Admiralty decided that HMS Elephant wasn't quite the right name. In 1957, she was rechristened HMS Hermes, after the winged messenger of the Greek gods. On November 18, 1959, over 15 years after her construction began, HMS Hermes was finally commissioned into the Royal Navy. She was a testament to perseverance, a ship that was nearly obsolete before she was even launched, yet had been reborn on the drawing board to become one of the most modern carriers of her day. Her initial air wing was a powerful expression of British naval aviation, consisting of de Havilland Sea Vixen all-weather fighters, Supermarine Scimitar strike aircraft, and Fairey Gannet airborne early warning planes, along with Westland Wessex helicopters for anti-submarine warfare. She was a formidable warship, a 28,000-ton behemoth capable of projecting British power anywhere in the world. Throughout the 1960s, Hermes patrolled the globe, from the Indian Ocean to the Atlantic, a visible symbol of a fading empire still clinging to its global reach. But the winds of change were blowing hard. Britain's economy was struggling, and the costs of maintaining a large carrier fleet were becoming prohibitive. In 1966, a defense review signaled the end of the line for Britain's conventional aircraft carriers. The future, it seemed, was in smaller ships and vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. Hermes's fate seemed sealed. She was converted first into a commando carrier in 1971, swapping her fast jets for the big Wessex and Sea King helicopters of the Royal Marines. Then, in 1976, she was refitted again, this time as a dedicated anti-submarine warfare carrier, hunting for Soviet submarines in the cold, dark waters of the North Atlantic. It seemed like a quiet, dignified end to her career. By the early 1980s, HMS Hermes was considered an aging relic. The new, smaller Invincible-class carriers were entering service, and Hermes was scheduled for decommissioning in 1982. Her story was supposed to be over, but history, as it so often does, had other plans. On April 2, 1982, Argentinian forces invaded the Falkland Islands, a remote British territory deep in the South Atlantic. The British government, led by Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, responded with astonishing speed and determination. A massive naval task force was assembled to sail 8,000 miles, 1,275 kilometers, south and reclaim the islands. The brand new HMS Invincible was ready, but the Royal Navy needed more. They needed a larger, more experienced platform. They needed Hermes. The old carrier, just weeks away from being mothballed, was suddenly the most important ship in the Royal Navy. A frantic period of reactivation began at Portsmouth. Dockyard workers labored around the clock to bring her back to full war-fighting capability. The most significant addition was a 12-degree ski jump ramp, a deceptively simple but brilliant British invention that allowed the new Sea Harrier jets to take off with a much heavier payload of fuel and weapons. Within a whirlwind 72 hours, HMS Hermes was loaded with ammunition, stores, and aircraft. She was declared the flagship of the British task force, and under the command of Captain Lindley Middleton, she sailed from Portsmouth on April 5 to the cheers of thousands lining the shore. On her flight deck sat a dozen Sea Harriers of 800 Naval Air Squadron, the key to Britain's hopes of achieving air superiority over the islands. The long voyage south was a period of intense training and preparation. Hermes was not just a carrier. She was the command center for the entire operation, with Admiral Sandy Woodward and his staff orchestrating the campaign from her flag bridge. She linked up with other elements of the task force, including a contingent of Royal Air Force Harrier GR-3s, flown by RAF pilots who had to quickly learn the terrifying art of landing a fast jet on a pitching, rolling deck in the middle of a hostile ocean. When the task force arrived in the South Atlantic, Hermes was at the very heart of the action. She, along with Invincible, formed the vital core of the British fleet, operating in what became known as the Carrier Box, a heavily defended area east of the Falklands, from where they launched relentless airstrikes against Argentinian positions. Life aboard Hermes during the 74-day war was one of constant tension and relentless activity. The threat of air and submarine attack was ever present. The ship was at action stations for hours on end, the crews snatching sleep whenever they could. Her Sea Harriers were magnificent, flying combat air patrols and ground attack missions, proving themselves vastly superior to the Argentinian jets they faced. The pilots of 800 Squadron became heroes, their skill and courage in the cockpit saving countless lives on the ships and on the ground below. Hermes endured the brutal weather of the South Atlantic winter, a relentless enemy in its own right, with monstrous waves and freezing gales. On May 25th, the container ship Atlantic Conveyor, carrying vital supplies and helicopters, was struck by an Exet missile and sunk, a devastating blow. The loss was felt deeply aboard Hermes, a stark reminder of the deadly stakes of the conflict. But she and her crew persevered. On June 14, 1982, the Argentinian forces on the Falklands surrendered. The war was over. HMS Hermes, the ship that was supposed to be scrap, had led Britain to a remarkable and improbable victory. She returned to Portsmouth a conquering hero, her place in Royal Navy history forever secured. After the Falklands, Hermes remained in service for a few more years, but her time was genuinely running out. She was finally decommissioned from the Royal Navy in 1984 and placed in reserve. It seemed her incredible story had at last reached its conclusion. But half a world away, another navy was watching. The Indian Navy had operated an aircraft carrier, the INS Viraat, since 1961. But that ship was aging, and India, a rising power with vast maritime interests, needed a more modern and capable flagship. The recently retired Hermes, battle-proven and available, was the perfect candidate. Negotiations began, and in April 1986, a deal was struck. India would purchase the Falklands Legend. The ship was towed to Devonport Dockyard, for one of the most extensive refits of her life. The goal was not just to repair and refurbish her, but to modernize her for another 2 decades of service. Her electronics were updated with modern radar and fire control systems. Her boilers, the very heart of the ship, were completely overhauled. Her living quarters were refurbished to accommodate an Indian crew. The entire process took over a year. Finally, on May 12, 1987, in a formal ceremony, the white ensign of the Royal Navy was lowered for the last time and the tricolor of India was hoisted. HMS Hermes was no more. She was commissioned into the Indian Navy as INS Viraat. The name was perfectly chosen. In Sanskrit, Viraat means giant. The newly christened Viraat sailed for India, carrying her new air wing of Sea Harrier FRS Mark 51 fighters and Sea King helicopters. Her arrival marked the beginning of a new chapter in the Indian Navy's history. For the next 3 decades, INS Viraat would be the undisputed flagship of the fleet, the centerpiece of India's naval power, and a dominant presence in the Indian Ocean. Her motto was Jalamev Yashya, Balamev Tasya, a Sanskrit phrase which translates to, "He who controls the sea is all-powerful." Viraat was the very embodiment of that principle. Her primary weapon was the Sea Harrier, operated by Indian Naval Air Squadron 300, nicknamed the White Tigers. These remarkable jets, an upgraded version of the ones that had fought in the Falklands, gave India a formidable naval strike capability. Viraat quickly proved her worth. In 1989, she was deployed as part of Operation Jupiter, a crucial mission during the Indian Peacekeeping Forces' intervention in the Sri Lankan Civil War. The carrier acted as a deterrent, her presence offshore sending a powerful message of India's commitment and capability, helping to enforce a blockade. This was the first major operational test for the giant, and she passed with flying colors. Throughout the 1990s, she was the cornerstone of India's maritime strategy, participating in countless exercises, flying the flag on diplomatic visits, and ensuring the security of India's vital sea lanes. She was far more than just a warship, she was a floating city. At full complement, she was home to over 350 sailors and aviators. Life on board was a microcosm of India itself, a diverse community of people from every corner of the country, living and working together in the confined, complex world of a carrier. For the thousands of men who served on her, she was not just a ship, she was mother. She was a demanding, unforgiving parent, requiring constant attention and hard work, but she also protected them, nurtured their careers, and forged bonds of comradeship that would last a lifetime. An incredible number of senior Indian naval officers, including several who would go on to become the Chief of Naval Staff, earned their sea legs on the decks of Viraat. She was the schoolhouse for an entire generation of naval leadership. Her influence on the culture and professionalism of the Indian Navy is impossible to overstate. As the years rolled on, keeping the grand old lady operational became a Herculean task. A ship designed in the 1940s was now sailing in the 21st century. She underwent several major life extension refits in 1993, 1999, and 2009. Her aging hull, machinery, and systems required constant, painstaking maintenance. Her British-built steam turbines and boilers were a particular challenge, with spare parts becoming increasingly scarce. The Indian Navy's engineers and technicians became masters of improvisation, keeping her heart beating long after it should have given out. But there was no escaping the march of time. In December 2001, following a terrorist attack on the Indian Parliament, India and Pakistan stood on the brink of war. The Indian Armed Forces launched Operation Parakram, a massive mobilization along the border. At sea, INS Viraat led the Indian fleet, her Harriers providing a crucial air defense umbrella, her very presence a powerful strategic asset during the tense, months-long standoff. By the 2010s, the end was clearly in sight. India had acquired a new, far more modern carrier, the INS Vikramaditya, and was building its own indigenous carrier. Viraat, the veteran warrior, was finally ready for a well-deserved retirement. Her last operational deployment was for the International Fleet Review in February 2016, a fitting final curtain call where she led a spectacular parade of warships from around the world. On March 6, 2017, in a solemn and emotional ceremony in Mumbai, INS Viraat was formally decommissioned from the Indian Navy. After 30 years of service to India and a total of 57 years in commission between two navies, her long watch was finally over. In her lifetime, she had steamed over 588,000 nautical miles, enough to circle the globe 27 times. What followed was a long and heartbreaking saga. There was a strong desire, both within the Navy and among the public, to preserve the historic ship. She was, after all, a unique link to two nations' naval heritage and a battle-winning flagship. Ambitious plans were proposed to convert her into a maritime museum, a luxury hotel, or a conference center. State governments expressed interest, and private companies drew up blueprints. But the sheer cost and logistical complexity of converting and maintaining such a massive vessel proved to be an insurmountable obstacle. For 3 years she sat at anchor in Mumbai's naval dockyard, rusting and silent, a ghost of her former glory. One by one, the plans to save her fell through. The sad reality was that no one was willing or able to commit the enormous funds required. In 2020, the inevitable decision was made. The grand old lady was sold for scrap. In September of that year, she left her home port of Mumbai for the last time, under tow, on a final, somber voyage to the shipbreaking yards of Alam in Gujarat. Pictures of her being run aground on the muddy beach were a gut-wrenching sight for naval enthusiasts and veterans in both Britain and India. The slow, methodical process of dismantling her began, piece by piece, plate by plate. The ship that had survived the Cold War, won the Falklands War, and guarded the Indian Ocean for 3 decades was being reduced to a pile of scrap metal. It was a tragic end for a vessel with such a rich and storied history. Yet, a ship's true legacy is not in its steel, but in the history it made and the people it shaped. INS Viraat, formerly HMS Hermes, holds a legacy that is truly unique. She is officially recognized by the Guinness Book of World Records as the longest-serving warship in the world. She played a pivotal role in one of the most significant conflicts of the late 20th century, ensuring a British victory in the Falklands. She then went on to serve as the powerful and respected flagship of the Indian Navy for 30 years, a symbol of India's rise as a major maritime power. She trained thousands of sailors, pilots, and officers, leaving an indelible mark on 2 proud naval traditions. Though her hull is gone, her story endures. It is a story of incredible longevity, of adaptation, of service, and of a warrior spirit that transcended flags and oceans. She was the grand old lady of the sea, a true giant of naval history, and her legend will sail on forever. We've journeyed through nearly 60 years of history with one incredible warship, but there are countless other stories of military hardware and legendary figures waiting to be told. What piece of military history, legendary machine, or untold story should we investigate next? Drop your suggestions below. Consider it your mission briefing to us. Your idea might just become our next deep dive into the fascinating world of military history. And if you enjoyed this journey and want to ensure you're on board for the next expedition, make sure you hit that subscribe button. It's the best way to support the channel and guarantee you don't miss out on future missions. Thanks for watching.